we go! Oh, what do you know? It's working.
It's time for 100 Years Rick and Morty. Episode 2 of Season 3 takes us to a Mad Max-inspired wasteland full of shoulder-mounted midgets and leather-wearing raiders. Before we get there though, Jerry's on the verge of leaving, and he tries to have one last conversation with his kids. It's at this point we see the Yuto van from the very first episode, which was outside of the family's home, presumably because of Rick recently moving in. Ironically, this time it's here because Jerry is moving out having been divorced, making this a slightly dark Easter egg. After being transported to the desert wasteland, Rick finds the local inhabitants to be in possession of a glowing green stone that he wants. He realises that there's far too many people surrounding it though, and that he won't be able to get it unless he distracts them somehow. This brings him to the only natural conclusion of injecting his grandson with the muscle memory of a nearby limb hanging off a chain, giving Morty great strength in exchange for loss of control over his left arm. His arm drags him into the arena, humorously named the Blood Dome. Morty ends up fighting all sorts of freaks within the arena, but there's one that stands out in particular. While Morty is in the middle of begging his arm to stop, he ends up killing a mutant wearing not only a stop sign but a traffic cone as well, which is about as dark as irony gets. While Morty is in the middle of killing everyone his arm decides needs to die, Summer goes off with the other raiders to explore a ruined city. Hemorrhage explains that after an event ambiguously named the Boom Boom, some people stayed around the craters that were left in the aftermath of the apocalypse. Though he speaks in baby words, what he's trying to tell Summer is that the radiation rotted away their brains and left them obsessed with advertisements. While most things within the city are covered in muck or otherwise indistinguishable, one mutant on top of a building is clearly wearing a shirt that says Atari. That is just before he gets his brains blown out. Meanwhile, back in the arena, Morty is forced to keep killing raider after raider with his grossly oversized arm. While he's doing a good job of it, it's all down to the arm, and Morty himself is terrified. While Morty pleads to not have to fight any longer, his arm does the opposite, beckoning more fighters into the arena. The specific gesture it performs is a reference to Hulk Hogan's famous taunt that he did to imitate hearing the crowd. Perhaps Morty's arm was a legendary wrestler in its former life. After killing multiple mutants, Summer returns and is proud to tell everyone that Morty is her brother. Morty suggests that they don't leave just yet, but Hemorrhage reminds them that that won't be happening anyhow. He expects them to stay on the planet forever. Rick attempts a bluff when suddenly a random raider dives into the arena and announces that the glowing green rock has been stolen. Morty's possessed arm then pulls it out of Rick's bag, without a second thought, proving to everyone that Rick stole it. Rick then looks directly at the camera and says we'll be right back, continuing his trend of breaking the fourth wall when no one else does. Rick definitely seems to be aware that he's in a TV show. Rick abandons his grandkids on the planet after a disagreement and has to fool Beth into thinking he brought them back with him by making 2 robot clones. Meanwhile in the wasteland, Morty continues to fight in the Blood Dome as he befriends his arm. It turns out his arm has a personal vendetta against someone in the crowd, and it ends up forcing Morty to burn him alive. While this is all happening, hidden within the background of the scene is graffiti depicting a sad face, which surely sums up how the guy in the throes of burning must feel right now. After Rick makes up with his grandchildren and agrees to stay in the wasteland a little longer, he manages to create peace with the raiders by showing them how to use the glowing rock. After this, we see that the raiders have created an entire city with their newfound source of power, and seem to be on their way to rebuilding civilization. Hemorrhage has switched to more casual attire in this time, and his shirt has a picture of someone called Big Johnson. I looked this up as I thought it might be a reference I wasn't getting, and sure enough I found out that Big Johnson is a brand of shirts all to do with sexual innuendos. I personally don't recommend looking it up unless you're into cartoonishly disproportionate women and extremely dry humour. Earlier, when with Beth, Rick has a very deadpan reaction to her divorce with Jerry. Rick is pretending to not care about what Beth does, but really he hates Jerry and couldn't be happier that he's gone. This is humorously paralleled in the dystopian world with Summer and her boyfriend Hemorrhage. The two break up and Rick has the exact same deadpan reaction, proving he knew what was going to happen well in advance. After Morty loses his giant arm, there's a noticeable hole in the side of his shirt where it used to be. Normally this would just be a small detail that carries on for a single scene, but even by the time Rick and Morty have made it back home, the hole is still there on Morty's shirt. This is some pretty commendable attention to detail, as most shows would have just had Morty in a brand new shirt in the very next cut, but as Morty never brought a spare shirt with him, his is ripped for the rest of his adventure. Finally, we get an update on where Jerry is living. He seems to have moved into a motel surrounded by hookers. It's hard not to feel sorry for the incredibly pathetic guy. During the scene after the credits, he goes downstairs to collect his unemployment check, only to be confronted by a ravenous wolf. He somehow fools himself into thinking that the wolf wants the check rather than his potato chips. After that, we hear the wind rustling and someone faintly whispering loser. This also happens near the beginning of the episode, really reinforcing the idea that Jerry is completely useless.
What?
Before I go, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to my patrons, my head scientists Asgore and Shi, Cameron Vigil, Kay Jensen, Sophronius and Illumanti Gamer, and my Underlab scientists Crystal Slate, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arler, Marisa Ray, Corey Kidwell, Yushio Coroni, Sarah Wydra and Emily Gatewood. Thanks to the generosity of every name you see here, this channel is able to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out the Patreon link below, as well as the video that explains why I'd so massively appreciate your contribution.